In January 2019, one of football's greatest ever players walked into a Madrid courtroom to face charges that threatened to tarnish a legacy built over decades. Cristiano Ronaldo, five-time Ballon d'Or winner and global icon, was there to answer for alleged tax fraud totaling €14.7 million. This case wasn't just about one player's tax affairs. It exposed the intricate web of offshore companies, legal loopholes, and aggressive tax planning that had become commonplace in elite football. Stay till the end to find out how Spain made an example out of Cristiano and sentenced him to prison. To understand Ronaldo's tax case, we must first understand the unique tax environment that existed when he joined Real Madrid in 2009. Spain had implemented what became known as the Beckham Law in 2005, officially titled Royal Decree 687/2005. This special tax regime was designed to attract highly skilled foreign workers, particularly wealthy ones, to Spain by offering them extraordinarily favorable tax treatment. The law earned its nickname after footballer David Beckham became one of its first high-profile beneficiaries when he joined Real Madrid from Manchester United. Under this regime, foreign workers relocating to Spain could elect to be taxed as non-residents for tax purposes, even while living in the country. This meant they paid a flat 24% tax rate on Spanish-sourced income only, while their foreign income and assets remained completely untaxed by Spain. For a country whose regular residents faced progressive tax rates reaching 45 to 47%, this was an extraordinary advantage. The Beckham Law proved incredibly effective at luring football talent to La Liga. Real Madrid and Barcelona became magnets for the world's best players, who could now earn enormous salaries while paying significantly less tax than they would in England, Italy, or Germany. Cristiano Ronaldo, joining Madrid from Manchester United in 2009 for a then-world record £80 million, was able to benefit from this regime. However, political winds were shifting. As Spain plunged into economic crisis following the 2008 financial collapse, public sentiment turned against what many saw as preferential treatment for the wealthy. In 2010, Spain's left-wing government began imposing restrictions on the Beckham Law, capping the income eligible for the reduced rate at €600,000 annually. By 2015, professional athletes were explicitly excluded from the regime's benefits entirely. This changing regulatory landscape created a perfect storm. Players who had structured their financial affairs under one set of rules suddenly found those rules changing. Spanish tax authorities, facing intense pressure to increase revenue during an economic crisis, began scrutinizing the complex offshore structures many players had established. The hunt was on, and football's biggest names were in the crosshairs. Central to Ronaldo's case, and indeed to most football tax controversies, was the concept of image rights. This financial innovation had transformed how elite players monetized their fame, but it would also become their biggest legal vulnerability. Image rights represent the commercial value of a player's name, likeness, persona, and unique characteristics. For a global superstar like Ronaldo, these rights were worth tens of millions annually. Companies like Nike, Tag Heuer, and countless others paid handsomely for the right to associate their brands with his image. These weren't just endorsement deals. They were sophisticated licensing arrangements that could be packaged, sold, and traded like any other intellectual property. The concept of separating a player's income into two streams, wages for playing football and licensing fees for image rights, emerged approximately 20 years before Ronaldo's case, with Arsenal stars like Dennis Bergkamp and David Platt among the pioneers. The financial logic was straightforward. Wages had to be paid in the country where the work was performed and was subject to high personal income tax rates. Image rights, however, were intellectual property that could theoretically be owned and managed by companies located anywhere in the world. This is where offshore financial planning entered the picture. Players and their advisors realized that by transferring ownership of image rights to companies registered in low-tax or no-tax jurisdictions, they could legally reduce their tax burdens. The player would establish a company in a location like the British Virgin Islands, Ireland, or Switzerland. This company would officially own the player's image rights. When sponsors wanted to use the player's image, they would pay the offshore company rather than the player directly. The offshore company would then pay the player a salary or dividends, often structured to minimize overall tax liability. For tax authorities, this presented an enormous challenge. How much of a player's image rights income was truly earned abroad versus earned in the country where they played? If Ronaldo's face appeared on a billboard in Madrid, was that income earned in Spain or earned wherever his image rights company was registered? If he did a photo shoot for Nike while in Manchester, but the images were used globally, where was that income really generated? These weren't simple questions, and different jurisdictions had different interpretations. This ambiguity created opportunities for aggressive tax planning, but it also created significant legal risk when tax authorities decided the structures had gone too far. The allegations. What Ronaldo was accused of. In June 2017, Spanish prosecutors filed charges that would shake the football world. Cristiano Ronaldo was accused of 4 counts of tax fraud between 2011 and 2014, allegedly defrauding the Spanish treasury of €14.7 million. The accusations were specific and damning. According to the prosecutor's report, Ronaldo had established a corporate structure in 2010 designed specifically to conceal income generated in Spain from image rights. The setup involved multiple layers of offshore companies in jurisdictions known for banking secrecy and favorable tax treatment. Documents allege that Ronaldo used shell companies registered in the British Virgin Islands, Ireland, Colombia, Panama, and Switzerland, a complex web that prosecutors claimed served no legitimate business purpose beyond tax avoidance. The British Virgin Islands company was described as particularly problematic. Prosecutors alleged this entity was a phantom company, existing only on paper, with no actual business operations or employees. According to leaked documents published by the investigative journalism consortium known as Football Leaks, Ronaldo's funds were allegedly stored in a small law firm located above a pharmacy in the Caribbean archipelago. The company's sole purpose, prosecutors argued, was to serve as a repository for income that should have been declared in Spain. From this Virgin Islands company, the structure allegedly channeled income through additional companies in Ireland, a country known for its low corporate tax rates and frequently used in international tax planning. The Irish companies would then license the rights onward, creating multiple layers that made it difficult for tax authorities to trace the ultimate flow of money and determine where tax was actually owed. The specific allegations broke down into several categories. First, prosecutors claimed Ronaldo had voluntarily and consciously failed to declare approximately €28.4 million in income linked to the sale of his image rights to a Spanish company. This was income that prosecutors said was clearly owned in Spain and should have been subject to Spanish tax, regardless of any offshore structure. Second, they alleged he had significantly understated his Spanish income between 2011 and 2014. While Ronaldo declared only €11.5 million in Spain-related income during those years, prosecutors calculated his actual Spanish earnings at closer to €43 million, a difference of €31.5 million in undeclared income. Third, prosecutors took issue with how Ronaldo had characterized certain income sources. They alleged he falsely reported that some income came from real estate investments when it actually came from image rights, presumably to take advantage of different tax treatments for different types of income. The timing of certain transactions raised particular suspicion. In 2014, just before the Beckham law was set to expire for him, Ronaldo sold his future image rights, covering the period 2015 to 2020, to Singaporean businessman Peter Lim for approximately €153 million. At the time, Ronaldo's team described this as a very strategic move to take the Cristiano Ronaldo brand to the next level, especially in Asia. However, prosecutors viewed the timing differently, as a rush to lock in the favorable Beckham law tax rate before it disappeared, even for income that would actually be earned in later years under different tax rules. Perhaps most seriously, prosecutors alleged this was all intentional. They used words like voluntary, conscious, and knowingly in their charging documents. This wasn't portrayed as an honest mistake or a good-faith disagreement over tax law interpretation. Prosecutors were alleging deliberate fraud with a specific intent to evade taxes owed to the Spanish government. The financial penalty wasn't the only threat. Under Spanish law, Ronaldo faced potential prison time. Prosecutors initially sought a sentence that could have totaled up to 6 years, 2 years for each year of alleged fraud. For a man who had built his life and legend on the football pitch, the prospect of imprisonment, even if unlikely to be served, represented an existential threat to his reputation and legacy. Ronaldo and his legal team vigorously denied any wrongdoing, at least initially. Their defense rested on several key arguments that highlighted the genuine complexity and ambiguity in international tax law, particularly regarding image rights. The first and perhaps strongest argument was about the international nature of Ronaldo's image. His defense team argued that approximately 90% of Ronaldo's image rights income was genuinely earned outside of Spain. When Nike paid for the right to use Ronaldo's image, those advertisements appeared in countries around the world, not just in Spain. When he did promotional appearances in Asia, South America, or the United States, that income was earned abroad. His social media presence, which generated enormous value, reached a global audience. Why? His lawyers asked, should Spain tax income that was clearly generated through his international brand? Moreover, the defense pointed out that Ronaldo had actually been proactive about complying with Spanish tax law. In 2014, when he saw other footballers being investigated and recognized that Spanish authorities were taking a stricter interpretation of where image rights income was earned, Ronaldo voluntarily paid an additional €6 million to the Spanish tax authorities. This payment, his team argued, represented a good-faith effort to ensure compliance. If he had truly intended to defraud the government, would he have voluntarily come forward with additional payment? The defense also challenged the characterization of his offshore companies as mere shells with no legitimate purpose. They argued that these structures served real business functions in managing a global brand. Ronaldo's image rights were licensed to companies operating in dozens of countries. Having corporate entities in jurisdictions with established commercial law and contract frameworks made business sense. The fact that these jurisdictions also offered favorable tax treatment was, they argued, simply smart business, not criminal fraud. Furthermore, Ronaldo's team emphasized that he had relied on professional advisors throughout. He had hired tax experts, accountants, and lawyers specifically to ensure compliance with applicable laws. These weren't back-alley advisors helping him dodge taxes. These were respected professionals from established firms. If the structure was illegal, shouldn't the blame lie with those advisors rather than with Ronaldo himself? His representatives from Gestifiute, the management company run by super agent Jorge Mendes, issued strong statements defending Ronaldo's tax compliance. They published details of his asset declarations, showing he had reported €191 million in assets to authorities. They insisted there was no offshore structure for evading taxes and that all contractual arrangements fully observe Spanish tax regulations. Real Madrid also came to their star player's defense. The club issued a statement demanding the maximum respect for players such as Cristiano Ronaldo, whose conduct has been absolutely exemplary during the whole of his career at our club. The club noted that Spanish tax authorities had confirmed Ronaldo was aware of his obligations, portraying the situation as a dispute over interpretation rather than intentional fraud. Ronaldo himself maintained his innocence in public statements. "My conscience is quite clear," he declared when the charges first emerged. He characterized the situation as harassment by tax authorities and suggested he was being targeted precisely because of his fame and wealth. The allegations, he implied, were more about optics and political pressure than about actual criminality. The legal precedent, Lionel Messi's case. Ronaldo's case didn't occur in a vacuum. Just months earlier, his greatest rival, Lionel Messi, had faced remarkably similar charges and had been convicted of tax fraud. The Messi case established crucial legal precedent that would heavily influence how Ronaldo's situation unfolded. In 2016, a Barcelona court convicted Messi and his father, Jorge Horacio Messi, of defrauding the Spanish government of €4.1 million between 2007 and 2009. Like Ronaldo, the charges centered on image rights income that prosecutors claimed should have been taxed in Spain but had instead been channeled through offshore companies in tax havens. In Messi's case, in Belize and Uruguay. Messi's defense strategy bore striking similarities to arguments Ronaldo would later make. Messi claimed he knew nothing about the tax arrangements, saying he simply signed whatever documents his father put in front of him. "If my father says I should sign, I do it with my eyes closed," Messi testified. He portrayed himself as a footballer focused solely on his sport, who had delegated all financial matters to his father and trusted advisors. Jorge Messi supported this narrative, accepting responsibility for the tax planning decisions. Spanish courts rejected this defense entirely. They found that Messi knew or should have known what was happening with his income. The sums involved were too large, they reasoned, for Messi to be genuinely ignorant of the arrangements. Both Messi and his father were convicted and sentenced to 21 months in prison, though under Spanish law, first-time offenders with sentences under 2 years don't actually serve prison time. Messi's initial response was to appeal, hoping higher courts would overturn the conviction. However, in May 2017, just weeks before Ronaldo would be charged, Spain's Supreme Court upheld Messi's conviction. The highest court in Spain had definitively ruled that a footballer could not avoid criminal liability for tax fraud simply by claiming ignorance of his financial affairs. This precedent was devastating for Ronaldo's potential defense. If Messi, who had delegated everything to his father, couldn't escape liability, how could Ronaldo claim ignorance? The courts had established that professional footballers earning tens of millions annually had a personal responsibility to ensure their taxes were paid correctly, regardless of what advisors recommended. The Messi case established another crucial precedent. The actual prison sentences, while real in legal terms, wouldn't result in actual incarceration. After his conviction was upheld, Messi's 21-month sentence was converted to a fine, an additional €252,000 paid at a rate of €400 for each day of the original sentence. His father's 15-month sentence was similarly converted to a €180,000 fine. This meant that even if Ronaldo were convicted and sentenced to prison time, he almost certainly wouldn't see the inside of a cell. But perhaps the most important lesson from Messi's case was this: fighting the charges all the way through trial and appeal had been costly, stressful, and ultimately futile. Messi had maintained his innocence, taken his case to the highest court in Spain, and still been convicted. The legal fees alone must have been substantial, and the reputational damage from years of criminal proceedings was incalculable. Ronaldo and his advisors were watching closely. The message from Messi's case was clear. Spanish prosecutors were serious about pursuing these cases. Spanish courts were willing to convict famous footballers, and fighting the charges was likely to result in conviction anyway. A negotiated settlement was starting to look like the wisest path forward. The cases against Messi and Ronaldo were part of a much broader crackdown by Spanish tax authorities against footballers who had used offshore structures to manage image rights income. The systematic nature of these investigations revealed that what had been considered standard practice in football finance was now being aggressively prosecuted as criminal fraud. Neymar, Barcelona's Brazilian superstar, faced multiple tax investigations during his time in Spain. The complications from these cases would later contribute to his shock €222 million transfer to Paris Saint-Germain in 2017, which remains the highest transfer fee ever paid. Like Ronaldo, Neymar had structured his image rights through offshore companies, and Spanish authorities were demanding millions in back taxes. Javier Mascherano, Messi's teammate at Barcelona, was another high-profile victim of Spain's tax dragnet. In 2016, the Argentine midfielder accepted a 1-year prison sentence, which he wouldn't serve, for defrauding Spanish tax authorities of €1.5 million. Mascherano admitted guilt and paid substantial fines to resolve the case. Samuel Eto'o, the legendary Cameroon striker who had played for both Barcelona and Real Madrid, was handed a 22-month suspended sentence in 2022 for tax fraud of €3.8 million related to image rights during his Barcelona years. Eto'o's defense was particularly poignant. He claimed he was just a child at the time and had trusted his agent like a father to handle his financial affairs correctly. The courts weren't swayed. Xabi Alonso, Ronaldo's former Real Madrid teammate, also faced charges of defrauding Spanish tax authorities of €2 million during his playing days with the club from 2010 to 2012. Unlike most of his peers, Alonso refused to accept a plea bargain and insisted on fighting the charges. In a rare victory for a footballer, Alonso was ultimately cleared of all charges in 2019, though only after years of legal proceedings. Luka Modric, another Real Madrid midfielder, accepted a suspended 8-month prison sentence and paid a fine of €348,000 in 2018. He had been found guilty of defrauding the treasury of over €870,000 by using a company based in Luxembourg to manage his image rights income. Even managers weren't exempt. Jose Mourinho, one of football's most successful coaches, faced tax probes both in Spain and the UK for undeclared income from image rights during his coaching stints at Real Madrid and Chelsea. Mourinho eventually settled with Spanish authorities, paying €2 million in back taxes plus a €182,500 fine, and accepted a 1-year suspended sentence. Carlo Ancelotti, who had coached Real Madrid to their famous La Decima Champions League victory in 2014, was another manager caught up in the investigations. In 2024, he was fined and given a suspended prison sentence for defrauding Spanish tax authorities of over €1 million in undeclared image rights earnings during his 2014 to 2015 tenure at the club. The sheer number of cases revealed a systematic pattern. For years, elite footballers and their advisors had used offshore image rights companies as standard practice, believing these arrangements fell within legal boundaries or at worst occupied a gray area. Spanish authorities, however, had decided these structures crossed the line from aggressive tax planning into criminal fraud, and they were determined to make examples of the sport's biggest names. The message being sent was unmistakable. Spain's economic crisis meant the government needed revenue, and football's ultra-wealthy elite, who had been paying reduced taxes under the Beckham law while the country struggled, would no longer get special treatment. The days of complex offshore structures going unscrutinized were over. By mid-2018, Ronaldo and his legal team recognized that continuing to fight the charges was likely futile and potentially catastrophic for his reputation. The messy precedent loomed large, and the prospect of a criminal trial that could drag on for years held little appeal. Negotiations began for a settlement that would resolve the case without a full trial. In June 2018, news emerged that Ronaldo had reached a preliminary agreement with Spanish prosecutors. Under the proposed deal, he would plead guilty to the charges, pay a substantial fine, and accept a suspended prison sentence. For prosecutors, the agreement represented a victory, securing a conviction and significant financial penalty against one of the world's most famous people. For Ronaldo, it offered certainty and closure, allowing him to move on with his life and career. The financial terms were substantial. Ronaldo agreed to pay €18.8 million, approximately $21.6 million at the time, in fines and back taxes. This figure exceeded the original alleged fraud of €14.7 million, effectively including penalties and interest on the unpaid taxes. Additionally, he had already paid €5.7 million in July 2018, plus approximately €1 million in interest, bringing his total payments to approximately €25.5 million. The prison sentence, 23 months, was carefully calculated. Under Spanish law, first-time offenders receive suspended sentences for any prison term under 2 years. The 23-month sentence meant Ronaldo would be convicted of a crime and technically sentenced to prison, satisfying the legal system's need for punishment, but he would serve that time on probation without spending a single day behind bars. The official court date was set for January 22, 2019. By this point, Ronaldo had already left Real Madrid, having transferred to Juventus in July 2018 for €100 million. Many observers believed the tax case had influenced his decision to leave Spain, not because he feared prison, but because the ongoing legal troubles had soured his relationship with the country where he'd achieved his greatest successes. When January 22 arrived, Ronaldo returned to Madrid for his court appearance. The proceedings were anticlimactic by design. The deal had been negotiated in advance, so the courtroom appearance was purely ceremonial. Ronaldo entered the courtroom holding hands with his partner, Georgina Rodriguez. He had requested permission to appear via video link to avoid media attention, but this request was denied. Instead, he faced the cameras and the public. The hearing itself lasted approximately 15 minutes. Some reports said even less. Ronaldo formally accepted the guilty plea and the terms of the agreement. He signed the necessary documents. The judge formally imposed the €18.8 million fine and the 23-month suspended sentence. And that was it. Ronaldo walked out of the courthouse, past waiting media, and into a black van. He paused to sign a few autographs for fans, a surreal moment where a man who had just pleaded guilty to defrauding the Spanish government of millions was still treated like the superstar he was. Outside the courthouse, Ronaldo appeared relieved. While he had to plead guilty, a stain on his otherwise largely unblemished reputation, he had avoided a lengthy trial, the uncertainty of a court verdict, and the possibility of a harsher sentence. The financial hit was substantial but manageable for someone owning €30 million annually at Juventus, plus tens of millions more from endorsements. In his public statements following the settlement, Ronaldo maintained that he had never intended to defraud anyone. He characterized the situation as a misunderstanding about complex tax law and insisted he had always intended to pay what he owed. The guilty plea, his representatives implied, was simply pragmatic, a way to end an unfortunate situation and move forward. Critics, however, saw the outcome differently. They argued that Ronaldo had engaged in aggressive tax avoidance, got caught, and then bought his way out of serious consequences. The €18.8 million fine, while large in absolute terms, represented perhaps 2 or 3 months of his total income. For comparison, if an average Spanish worker earning €25,000 annually had been caught evading a proportional amount of tax, the fine would have bankrupted them, and they likely would have faced actual prison time. The two-tiered justice system argument gained traction. Could an ordinary person have negotiated such a favorable settlement? Would they have been offered a suspended sentence? Or did Ronaldo's wealth and celebrity status effectively place him above the law that applied to regular citizens? The tax case undeniably damaged Ronaldo's carefully cultivated image, though perhaps less severely than might have been expected. To understand why, we need to examine how different audiences reacted to his legal troubles. In Spain, public opinion was deeply divided. Many Spaniards felt outraged that wealthy foreigners like Ronaldo had come to their country, benefited from special tax laws, earned enormous fortunes playing for Spanish clubs, and then evaded even those reduced tax obligations through offshore structures. Spain had been through a devastating economic crisis. Unemployment had reached 26%, social services had been cut, and ordinary citizens had been forced to accept austerity measures. In that context, Ronaldo's tax fraud felt like a particular slap in the face. Spanish media coverage was harsh. El Mundo, one of Spain's leading newspapers, had published damning details from the Football Leaks documents showing the complexity of Ronaldo's offshore structures. Sports radio hosts like José Ramón de la Morena were unsparing in their criticism. The tax structure was created to steal from society. Everyone tries to do what they can within the law, but to hide money to avoid paying taxes is to steal. Some Spanish fans began booing Ronaldo at away matches. When Real Madrid played at rival stadiums, the whistles and jeers grew louder. This hostile atmosphere, combined with contract disputes with Real Madrid president Florentino Perez and the ongoing stress of the criminal investigation, contributed to Ronaldo's decision to leave Spain in 2018. In later interviews, he explicitly cited the treatment he received from Spanish authorities as a factor in his departure. However, in Portugal, Ronaldo's home country, public reaction was far more sympathetic. Portuguese media and fans tended to view the situation as Spanish persecution of their national hero. They pointed out that Ronaldo had paid enormous sums in taxes during his years in Spain, even if prosecutors claimed he hadn't paid enough. They noted that many footballers had similar structures, so singling out Ronaldo seemed unfair. Portuguese newspapers portrayed him as a victim of an overreaching Spanish tax system desperately seeking scapegoats during an economic crisis. International reactions were mixed but generally more sympathetic than in Spain. Many football fans worldwide took a cynical view of taxation generally and weren't particularly troubled by a wealthy athlete trying to minimize his tax bill. "Everyone tries to pay less tax if they can," was a common refrain. Others saw the situation in light of common practices in the sport. If half of La Liga's stars were using similar structures, was it really fair to prosecute Ronaldo specifically? Major sponsors, crucially, stood by him. Nike, his primary sponsor and one of the most valuable partnerships in sports, never wavered in its support. Tag Heuer, Herbalife, and other brands maintained their endorsement deals. In the cold calculus of sports marketing, the tax case was seen as a legal issue rather than a moral failing. Ronaldo hadn't been accused of violence, assault, or any crime directly harming another person. Tax evasion, particularly tax evasion achieved through complex legal structures advised by professionals, simply didn't carry the same stigma as other crimes. This sponsor loyalty reflected an important reality. Ronaldo's brand had been built on his football achievements and his work ethic, not on being a moral exemplar or model citizen. His image was of a supremely dedicated athlete who had transformed his body through training, someone who scored impossible goals through sheer determination. Whether he paid his fair share of taxes didn't fundamentally alter that narrative. Social media reaction demonstrated this complexity. Twitter and Instagram were filled with both criticism and defense. Some users shared memes mocking Ronaldo, comparing his offshore companies to his goal celebrations. Others defended him vigorously, arguing that everyone tries to minimize taxes and that using legal structures isn't criminal even if prosecutors claim otherwise. The debate often fell along familiar lines. Those already inclined to dislike Ronaldo, often Messi fans, used the case as additional ammunition, while Ronaldo's supporters dismissed it as irrelevant. Interestingly, the case may have actually enhanced Ronaldo's image in certain circles. Some saw his willingness to use offshore structures as savvy business acumen rather than criminality. In an era when wealth and business success are often celebrated regardless of how they are achieved, Ronaldo's tax planning could be viewed as smart financial management. The fact that he could negotiate a settlement that kept him out of prison was, to some observers, further evidence of his power and influence. The long-term impact on his legacy is still being written. When future generations remember Cristiano Ronaldo, will they recall the tax case, or will it be a mere footnote in a career defined by 5 Ballon d'Or, 5 Champions League titles, and over 800 career goals? Early indications suggest the latter. Sports history tends to remember athletic achievements far more than legal troubles, especially when those troubles are financial rather than violent. Comparing Ronaldo's situation to other athletes caught in tax controversies is instructive. In Germany, Formula One legend Michael Schumacher and Boris Becker both faced tax investigations that didn't fundamentally alter their legendary status. In Italy, various footballers over the years have had tax troubles without losing their hero status. What seems to matter most is whether the athlete is convicted of something truly heinous versus merely greedy or careless. Ronaldo's case ultimately fell into the greedy and careless category rather than anything darker. He hadn't hurt anyone directly. He'd used structures that were common in his industry, albeit allegedly crossing legal lines. He'd settled the case and paid his fines. For most fans, particularly those outside Spain, this was enough to move past the controversy and focus on what they cared about most: watching him score goals. One of the most striking aspects of Ronaldo's tax case was how little it affected his business empire and endorsement portfolio. In an era when celebrities can lose lucrative deals over a single controversial tweet, Ronaldo's conviction for tax fraud had remarkably minimal commercial consequences. Understanding why reveals important truths about modern sports marketing and personal branding. Nike, Ronaldo's most valuable sponsor with a lifetime deal worth a reported $1 billion, never publicly commented on the tax case and certainly never suggested ending their partnership. This silence was strategic and telling. Nike had invested decades into building Ronaldo's brand alongside him. He was one of their flagship athletes globally, with his own CR7 sub-brand of football boots and athletic wear. Walking away over tax issues in Spain would have been cutting off their nose to spite their face. From Nike's perspective, the calculus was straightforward. Would the tax case materially impact Ronaldo's ability to sell products? The answer was clearly no. Ronaldo's appeal to consumers was based on his athletic excellence, his fitness regime, his success story from poverty to global superstardom, and his aesthetic appeal. His tax compliance in Spain wasn't part of the brand proposition. Young athletes didn't buy CR7 boots because they admired his accounting practices. They bought them because they wanted to emulate his playing style. This indifference extended to his other major sponsors. Tag Heuer, the Swiss luxury watchmaker, maintained their partnership throughout the legal proceedings. They had signed Ronaldo in 2014, and their campaign positioning him as someone who don't crack under pressure took on an unintentionally ironic dimension during the tax case. But they showed no signs of backing away. Clear Shampoo, Herbalife Nutrition, and numerous other brands similarly stayed the course. The global nature of Ronaldo's appeal actually worked in his favor here. While Spanish consumers might have soured on him, the Spanish market represented only a fraction of Ronaldo's commercial value. His appeal in Asia, South America, Africa, and the Middle East, markets that were generally more sympathetic or indifferent to his Spanish legal troubles, remained strong. The CR7 brand continued expanding during and after the tax case. His fashion line, fragrances, hotels, and other business ventures showed no signs of suffering. In 2019, the same year he appeared in Madrid court, Forbes estimated his total earnings at $109 million, making him one of the highest-paid athletes globally. Of that, approximately $44 million came from endorsements and business ventures, essentially unchanged from previous years. This commercial resilience reflected several factors. First, the nature of the crime mattered. Tax evasion, particularly tax evasion accomplished through complex legal structures rather than crude cash-stuffing schemes, simply doesn't carry the same stigma as crimes of violence, theft, or moral turpitude. Sponsors might immediately drop an athlete accused of domestic violence or racism, but tax issues occupy a different moral category, particularly when the athlete maintains, however implausibly, that they relied on expert advice and made an honest mistake. Second, Ronaldo's personal brand had been carefully constructed over 2 decades to weather various storms. Unlike athletes whose brands are built on being wholesome role models, Ronaldo's brand emphasized excellence, determination, confidence bordering on arrogance, and relentless self-improvement. This brand identity could accommodate legal troubles more easily than a family values brand could. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Ronaldo had diversified his business interests to the point where no single sponsor or market was essential. This financial resilience gave him leverage. Sponsors knew that if they dropped him, competitors would likely swoop in. The risk-reward calculation favored staying loyal. That said, the case likely did have some subtle effects on Ronaldo's business dealings. While existing sponsors stayed loyal, the tax troubles may have affected his ability to secure certain new partnerships. Financial services companies, for instance, might have been hesitant to partner with someone convicted of financial fraud, even if technically tax-related. Companies seeking family-friendly spokespeople might have looked elsewhere. There's also the question of deal terms. While Nike and others maintained their partnerships, they may have negotiated more favorable terms for themselves during contract renewals, using the legal troubles as leverage. We'll likely never know the details of these private negotiations, but it would be surprising if the tax case didn't affect his bargaining position at least marginally. The comparison to Lionel Messi is instructive here as well. Messi faced similar tax troubles and reached a similar settlement, yet his commercial appeal never wavered either. Adidas, his primary sponsor, stood by him just as Nike stood by Ronaldo. The lesson for sponsors seemed clear. Football excellence transcended legal troubles, at least when those troubles were financial rather than violent or scandalous in more traditional ways. Ronaldo's case cannot be properly understood in isolation. It was part of a broader confrontation between football's globalized economy and national tax systems struggling to cope with that globalization. The controversy exposed fundamental tensions in how modern economies handle taxation of highly mobile, globally recognized talent. The structure of modern football had created these tensions. Players increasingly operated as global brands separate from their role as athletes. A player like Ronaldo might be employed by Real Madrid, but his image appeared on products sold worldwide, in advertising campaigns spanning continents, and across social media platforms reaching billions. Traditional tax systems, designed when most people worked in one country for one employer, struggled to handle this complexity. The Beckham law itself represented Spain's attempt to adapt to this reality, to compete for talent in a global market where top athletes could choose to live and work almost anywhere. But when economic crisis hit and public anger mounted at inequality, those same favorable tax treatments became politically untenable. This created a whipsaw effect for players like Ronaldo. They had structured their affairs under one set of rules and expectations, only to have those rules change retroactively in how they were interpreted and enforced. Tax authorities looked back at arrangements established years earlier and recharacterized them as criminal fraud, even though similar structures had been commonplace and seemingly accepted at the time they were established. The question of fairness arose repeatedly in public discourse about these cases. Was it fair to prosecute footballers for arrangements that had been standard practice in the industry? Many of these players had relied on professional advisors from respected firms who assured them the structures were legal. Should players be criminally liable for following professional advice that later turned out to be wrong, or at least more aggressive than tax authorities would accept? On the other hand, critics argued, shouldn't the ultra-wealthy be held to the same standards as everyone else? When an ordinary wage earner makes a mistake on their tax return, they face penalties and potentially criminal prosecution if the error is substantial and appears intentional. Why should multimillionaire footballers receive more lenient treatment simply because they can afford expensive advisors and complex offshore structures? The concept of aggressive tax avoidance versus tax evasion became central to these debates. Tax avoidance, using legal means to minimize tax liability, is generally accepted, even encouraged by some. Tax evasion, illegally failing to pay taxes owed, is criminal. But where's the line between them? Ronaldo's offshore structures operated in that gray area. His advisors almost certainly believed they were on the legal side of the line, engaging in aggressive but lawful tax planning. Spanish prosecutors, however, concluded those structures had crossed into criminal evasion. The international dimension added another layer of complexity. Ronaldo's income was genuinely international. When Nike paid him for appearing in an advertisement shown globally, how much of that income should be attributed to Spain versus other countries? When his Instagram posts reached 300 million followers worldwide, and sponsors paid for those posts, where was that income really earned? There are no easy answers to these questions, yet tax authorities must determine precise amounts owed. Some commentators viewed the Spanish crackdown as effectively punitive taxation disguised as criminal enforcement. Spain had lured players with the Beckham law, benefited enormously from having the world's best footballers in La Liga, which increased television revenues, tourism, and Spain's global prestige, and then retroactively decided these same players hadn't paid enough tax. From this perspective, the prosecutions looked opportunistic, a way to extract additional revenue from wealthy individuals who lack political power to fight back. Others saw it differently, as a necessary correction to years of undue enforcement and special treatment for the wealthy. During Spain's economic crisis, ordinary citizens had faced tax increases, benefit cuts, and harsh austerity measures. Meanwhile, football's elite were using offshore structures to pay minimal taxes. Prosecuting these cases, from this perspective, was about basic fairness and showing that everyone, regardless of wealth or fame, must contribute their fair share. The legal outcomes, plea bargains resulting in large fines but no actual prison time, satisfied no one completely. Critics felt the wealthy had essentially bought their way out of real consequences. Supporters of the players felt the prosecutions had been unfair persecution, extracting money through legal intimidation. The middle ground, that these were genuinely complex cases where both sides had legitimate arguments, had few vocal advocates. Lessons for other athletes in the industry. Ronaldo's case, along with Messi's and the numerous others, sent shockwaves through professional sports worldwide. The message to current and future athletes was unmistakable. Offshore tax structures that seemed clever and legally sound could later be recharacterized as criminal fraud. The lessons learned would reshape how top athletes manage their finances. The first and most obvious lesson was about professional advice. Ronaldo had relied on respected tax advisors who presumably assured him his arrangements were lawful. Yet he still found himself in criminal court. This created a chilling realization for athletes. Even professional advice from established firms might not protect you from prosecution. Due diligence on advisors became paramount. Athletes and their representatives began asking harder questions. Have similar structures been successfully challenged by tax authorities? What specific precedents support this approach? What's the worst-case scenario if authorities disagree with this interpretation? The second lesson concerned documentation and disclosure. Many of the prosecuted cases involve questions about whether income had been properly declared or whether offshore companies were mere shells. Athletes began understanding that thorough, transparent documentation was essential, not just to prove compliance, but to demonstrate good faith in case of disputes. Keeping detailed records of where work was actually performed, where value was actually created, and how decisions were made could prove crucial later. The third lesson was geographic. Spain had become particularly aggressive in pursuing these cases, but other countries had different approaches. This affected where players chose to play and live. The United Kingdom, despite having high tax rates, generally took a more predictable approach to tax enforcement. Italy offered special tax regimes for new residents. Portugal implemented favorable tax treatment for high earners. Players and agents began factoring tax risk, not just tax rates, into career decisions. These considerations manifested in the dramatic transfer of Neymar from Barcelona to Paris Saint-Germain in 2017. While officially about football ambitions, the move conveniently extracted Neymar from Spain just as his own tax troubles were intensifying. France's tax environment, while not particularly favorable rate-wise, at least offered a fresh start and different regulatory approach. Similarly, when Ronaldo chose Juventus in 2018, Italy's recently implemented favorable tax regime for new residents was likely a factor alongside football considerations. The fourth lesson concerned the image rights industry itself. Following the Spanish crackdowns, there was a marked shift toward more conservative structures. Instead of elaborate networks of offshore companies, many players began using simpler arrangements with more straightforward tax treatment. Some players started taking more of their compensation as direct salary rather than image rights payments, accepting the higher tax burden in exchange for reduced legal risk. Football clubs also adapted. Many began including more detailed tax compliance clauses in player contracts. Some clubs started providing or requiring tax compliance services for players, recognizing that player tax problems created risks for the club itself, both reputational and potentially financial if the club had been involved in setting up problematic structures. The fifth lesson was about public relations. Both Ronaldo and Messi initially tried to fight the charges, maintain innocence, and challenge the prosecutions. Both ultimately settled. This established a template. Fighting was costly, stressful, and unlikely to succeed, particularly given legal precedents. Future players facing similar situations increasingly moved toward early settlement, recognizing that quick resolution, while requiring admission of guilt and substantial payment, was preferable to years of legal battle. Agents and player representatives also learned important lessons. The super agents like Jorge Mendes, who represented multiple top players, faced questions about their role in establishing these structures. While agents weren't generally prosecuted themselves, the cases created liability concerns. Some agents began pushing for more conservative tax planning for their clients, recognizing that a tax scandal could damage not just the player's career but the agent's reputation in business. For younger players especially, the cases served as cautionary tales. Those just beginning their careers saw what happened to legends like Ronaldo and Messi and understood that financial missteps early on could haunt them for years. Youth academies and player development programs began including financial literacy and tax compliance education, recognizing that technical football skills alone wouldn't protect players from serious legal jeopardy. The offshore financial services industry also felt effects. Jurisdictions like the British Virgin Islands and Panama that had made their names providing secrecy and favorable tax treatment for corporate structures faced increased scrutiny. Following the Football Leaks revelations in the Panama Papers, there was growing international pressure for tax transparency. Some of these jurisdictions began implementing more stringent disclosure requirements, recognizing that being seen as enabling tax evasion was becoming more costly than the business was worth. In the years since his 2019 settlement, Ronaldo has successfully moved beyond the tax case in terms of his career and public image. His football achievements have continued to pile up. His commercial empire has expanded, And for most fans, the Spanish tax troubles have faded into the background as just one chapter in a long and storied career. After leaving Real Madrid in 2018, a decision influenced at least partly by the tax troubles and his frustrating relationship with Spanish authorities, Ronaldo joined Juventus. His 3 years in Italy were successful on an individual level, though Juventus failed to win the Champions League title they'd hoped he would deliver. Importantly, there were no tax scandals in Italy. Ronaldo's arrangements there appeared to have been structured more conservatively, learning from the Spanish experience. In 2021, Ronaldo made an emotional return to Manchester United, the club where he first became a superstar. While his second stint at Old Trafford was ultimately disappointing, ending acrimoniously in November 2022 following a controversial interview with Piers Morgan, it again passed without tax controversies. His UK tax affairs appeared to be in order. Most recently, Ronaldo's stunning move to Saudi Arabia's Al Nassr in January 2023 on a contract reportedly worth over $200 million annually marked a new phase. Saudi Arabia, seeking to build its sporting profile through massive investment in football, offered Ronaldo not just enormous salary but also what appears to be a very favorable tax situation, as the country imposes no personal income tax on individuals. The financial package, which some estimate could reach $500 million when including commercial agreements, suggests Ronaldo remains highly bankable despite being in his late 30s and despite the Spanish tax conviction on his record. His commercial portfolio has, if anything, expanded since the tax case. New endorsement deals, business ventures, and brand partnerships have continued to emerge. The CR7 brand spans multiple product categories, from hotels to underwear to fitness apps. Forbes continues to rank him among the world's highest-paid athletes year after year. In 2023, his total earnings were estimated at $136 million, making him the highest-paid footballer in the world. His social media presence, crucial to his commercial value, has only grown. With over 600 million followers across platforms, Ronaldo remains one of the most followed people on Earth. Each sponsored post reportedly commands fees in the millions. None of this has been materially affected by his guilty plea to tax fraud in Spain. The Spanish tax case did leave one permanent mark. Ronaldo seems unlikely to return to Spain in any significant capacity. While he occasionally visits for promotional events or holidays, his relationship with the country where he achieved his greatest football success appears permanently damaged. In interviews, he has spoken about feeling unfairly treated by Spanish authorities and media. Real Madrid fans, who once worshipped him, received news of his Ballon d'Or wins after leaving with decidedly mixed feelings. From a legal perspective, Ronaldo successfully completed his probation period without incident, meaning his criminal record has been addressed and he faces no ongoing legal jeopardy from the Spanish case. The financial penalty, while substantial, was manageable given his enormous earning power. In practical terms, the case is closed. However, the reputational impact lingers in subtle ways. While his core fan base has moved on, critics and rivals still occasionally reference his tax conviction. In social media arguments between Ronaldo and Messi fans, a perennial source of football discourse, both players' tax troubles get weaponized. Neither can claim moral high ground on this particular issue. Some marketing experts suggest the tax case may have slightly diminished Ronaldo's appeal for certain types of partnerships. While sports brands and lifestyle companies remained loyal, financial services firms, tax preparation companies, and brands built around trust and integrity might think twice before associating with someone convicted of tax fraud. We'll never know which potential deals didn't happen because of the conviction, but it's reasonable to assume some opportunities were lost. For Ronaldo personally, the experience appears to have been genuinely traumatic. In rare moments of candor, he has expressed hurt and frustration about the Spanish prosecution. He clearly felt he had been unfairly targeted, that his treatment had been driven by political and economic factors rather than genuine criminal behavior, and that the settlement, while pragmatic, forced him to admit to wrongdoing he didn't believe he was actually guilty of. Whether this belief is genuine or self-serving rationalization is impossible to know. Tax law is genuinely complex, particularly around international income and image rights. It's entirely possible Ronaldo believed in good faith that his advisors had set up legal structures, only to learn later that Spanish authorities viewed those same structures as criminal. It's also possible this is convenient narrative crafted to preserve his self-image and public reputation. What's clear is that Ronaldo emerged from the experience with his career intact, his earning power undiminished, and his legacy as one of football's greatest players secure. The tax conviction is part of his biography now, but it hasn't defined him or derailed him. In football terms, he successfully scored despite the setback. Examining how other athletes have navigated tax controversies provides useful context for evaluating Ronaldo's handling of his situation. The approaches vary widely, from aggressive denial to early capitulation, with different results. Wesley Snipes, the American actor, provides perhaps the most dramatic counterexample. Snipes fought tax evasion charges for years, maintained his innocence throughout, and ultimately was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, which he actually served. His refusal to settle or accept plea deals resulted in the harshest possible outcome. The contrast with Ronaldo's suspended sentence highlights the value of pragmatic settlement. In tennis, Boris Becker faced German tax authorities over similar issues, failing to declare income and claiming a resident status, Monaco, that authorities disputed. Like Ronaldo, Becker initially denied wrongdoing but eventually negotiated a settlement, receiving a suspended sentence and substantial fine. His career and reputation survived, much like Ronaldo's, suggesting this outcome is relatively common for athletes who settle such cases. Diego Maradona, Argentina's legendary footballer, faced multiple tax issues in Italy during and after his playing career. Unlike Ronaldo, Maradona largely ignored the Italian tax authorities, leading to decades of legal problems, asset seizures, and inability to visit Italy without risk of arrest. This head-in-the-sand approach proved disastrous, demonstrating the importance of actually addressing tax problems rather than hoping they'll go away. Michael Schumacher, Formula One's most successful driver, faced German tax investigations but was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. His situation differed from Ronaldo's in that Swiss authorities provided documentation supporting his claim of Swiss residence, whereas Ronaldo's offshore structures were more clearly designed primarily for tax purposes. Schumacher's experience shows that not all tax investigations end in convictions. Shakira, the Colombian singer, has faced ongoing tax troubles in Spain remarkably similar to Ronaldo's. Spanish prosecutors have accused her of failing to pay €14.5 million in taxes between 2012 and 2014 by claiming to live in the Bahamas while actually residing in Barcelona. As of 2024, Shakira has refused to settle and maintains her innocence, choosing to fight the case in court. The outcome of her case will be watched closely as a test of whether Ronaldo and Messi's decision to settle was wise or whether fighting can sometimes succeed. The common thread across these cases is that tax authorities worldwide have become increasingly aggressive in pursuing high-profile individuals. The days when celebrities could rely on offshore structures and favorable residency claims without scrutiny are largely over. Those who recognize this reality early and settle pragmatically generally fare better than those who fight lengthy battles. Ronaldo's approach, initial denial followed by negotiated settlement, represents a middle path. He didn't immediately capitulate, which might have been seen as admission of obvious guilt. But he didn't fight to the bitter end like Snipes, which proved catastrophic. Instead, he negotiated from a position where he could claim he was settling for pragmatic reasons rather than guilt, while still accepting legal responsibility and paying substantial sums. While public focus understandably centered on the financial and legal aspects of Ronaldo's tax case, the psychological and personal toll shouldn't be underestimated. Criminal prosecution, even for wealthy celebrities with top legal representation, creates enormous stress and anxiety. For someone like Ronaldo, whose entire identity and self-image are built around success, excellence, and being the best, facing criminal charges must have been particularly difficult. His public persona projects supreme confidence and invincibility. Sitting in a courtroom facing fraud allegations directly contradicted that image. The uncertainty alone would have been excruciating. For years, From when the investigation first became public in 2016 until the final settlement in 2019, Ronaldo lived with the possibility of serious criminal consequences. While Spanish legal experts consistently predicted he wouldn't actually serve prison time even if convicted, the theoretical possibility existed. Imagining himself in prison, one of the world's most recognizable people, incarcerated, must have been deeply unsettling. The impact on his family added another layer of stress. Ronaldo's mother and siblings had to watch him go through this ordeal. His children, though young, were not too young to hear playground taunts about their father being a criminal. His partner, Georgina Rodriguez, stood by him throughout, but the strain on any relationship from legal troubles is significant. The media scrutiny was relentless. Every development in the case became international news. Paparazzi followed him constantly. Sports journalists analyzed not his football, but his financial arrangements. Opinion pieces debated his character and integrity. For someone who controls his public image carefully, this loss of narrative control must have been deeply frustrating. The toll on his football performances is harder to measure, but likely existed. In the 2017-18 season, while the investigation was intensifying, Ronaldo's La Liga form dipped noticeably compared to previous years, though he remained brilliant in the Champions League. Some observers speculated the stress was affecting his focus. Whether this was truly the case or simply normal variation is impossible to determine definitively. His relationship with Real Madrid and Spanish football more broadly suffered. A player who had given the club 9 years and 4 Champions League titles felt insufficiently supported by the institution. Real Madrid's public statements backing Ronaldo were measured and careful, not the full-throated defense he might have hoped for. This likely contributed to his decision to leave in 2018. The experience also appears to have affected Ronaldo's trust in advisors. After the settlement, reports suggested he had reorganized his financial affairs and changed some of his advisory team. The people he had trusted to keep him legally safe had, at minimum, created enormous legal problems for him. That breach of trust likely had lasting effects on his professional relationships. There's also the question of guilt and self-perception. Did Ronaldo genuinely believe he had done nothing wrong, making the forced guilty plea psychologically damaging? Or did he know his arrangements were aggressive and risky, making the stress more about getting caught than about unjust persecution? We can't know his true internal state, but either scenario would have created significant psychological burden. For someone accustomed to winning, to being in control, to succeeding through preparation and hard work, the tax case represented a rare situation where he couldn't simply train harder or play better to achieve a positive outcome. His fate rested on legal interpretations, prosecutorial decisions, and factors largely beyond his control. This powerlessness must have been particularly difficult for someone whose entire career had been built on controlling outcomes through excellence. The settlement itself, while pragmatic, required Ronaldo to publicly admit criminal wrongdoing. For someone who cares deeply about his legacy and how he's perceived, accepting that label, tax fraudster, criminal, someone who cheated society, must have been personally devastating even if legally necessary. Ronaldo's case, along with a broader Spanish crackdown on footballer tax arrangements, has had lasting effects on how football finances are structured. The industry learned hard lessons about the limits of aggressive tax planning and the risks of assuming that common practices are necessarily legal practices. The most obvious change has been in image right structuring. The elaborate offshore arrangements that were standard in the 2000s and early 2010s have largely given way to more transparent structures. Players still seek to maximize value from their image rights. That hasn't changed, but the methods have become more conservative. Instead of networks of companies in multiple jurisdictions, many players now use simpler structures with clearer business purposes beyond tax reduction. Some players have moved away from separating image rights income entirely, instead taking comprehensive packages from clubs that include both salary and compensation for image rights, all taxed under the same framework. While this may result in higher overall tax burdens, it also creates far less legal risk. Clubs themselves have changed their approaches. Manchester City, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and other elite clubs now provide more comprehensive tax compliance support for players. This isn't altruistic. It's recognition that player tax problems create club problems. Media scrutiny of a player's tax issues reflects poorly on the club. Contract negotiations can be disrupted by tax investigations. Star players might want to leave to escape tax authorities. Clubs have realized that ensuring players' tax compliance protects the club's interests. The agent industry has also evolved. Super agents like Jorge Mendes, who represents numerous top players, have had to adapt their advisory practices. Some agents who had built reputations for aggressive tax structuring found themselves exposed when those structures collapsed under scrutiny. The smarter agents have pivoted toward more conservative approaches, recognizing that a client's tax scandal damages the agent's reputation and business. Transfer decisions increasingly factor in tax considerations more explicitly. When a player considers moving clubs, their team now routinely analyzes not just the salary offered but the tax treatment in the destination country, the track record of tax authorities then pursuing cases against footballers, and the overall risk profile. Spain, despite its top-quality football and attractive lifestyle, has become a harder sell precisely because of these tax controversies. New regulations and international cooperation on taxation have also emerged. The OECD's Base Erosion and Profit Shifting (BEPS) project, while broader than just football, has made certain types of aggressive international tax planning more difficult. The automatic exchange of financial information between tax authorities means it's harder to hide income in offshore structures. The Football Leaks revelations led to calls for more transparency in football finances generally. Some countries have adapted their tax systems to attract football talent while avoiding the appearance of special treatment that caused backlash in Spain. Portugal, for instance, implemented a non-habitual resident regime that offers favorable tax treatment for new residents, including footballers, but with more explicit legal frameworks and transparency. Italy introduced a similar program. These represent attempts to compete for talent in a global market while creating more legally defensible structures than Spain's Beckham law had proven to be. The financial services industry that had grown up around servicing footballer wealth has had to adapt as well. Tax advisory firms, wealth management companies, and corporate service providers can no longer offer the same aggressive strategies they once did. Those that fail to adapt risk either losing business to more conservative competitors or facing their own legal jeopardy if their advice leads to client prosecutions. Youth player education has changed significantly. Football academies increasingly include financial literacy in their curricula, teaching young players about tax obligations, the risks of aggressive planning, and the importance of understanding any financial advice they receive. The cases of Ronaldo, Messi, and others serve as cautionary tales for the next generation. There's also been broader societal impact. The football tax cases contributed to public discourse about tax fairness, wealth inequality, and whether the ultra-rich pay their fair share. While Ronaldo's case alone didn't change tax policy, it was part of a larger movement toward demanding more transparency and compliance from high-net-worth individuals. The saga of Cristiano Ronaldo's Spanish tax case offers numerous lessons for athletes, their advisors, tax authorities, and society more broadly. These lessons extend well beyond the specifics of Ronaldo's situation to illuminate fundamental issues about globalization, taxation, fairness, and fame. For athletes, the primary lesson is clear: reputation and legal safety should outweigh marginal tax savings. Ronaldo saved some money through his offshore structures, but the eventual cost, in fines, legal fees, stress, reputational damage, and the decision to leave Spain, far exceeded any tax benefits. Future athletes would be wise to structure their affairs conservatively, accepting higher tax burdens in exchange for certainty and peace of mind. For advisors, the lesson is about balancing client demands for tax minimization with realistic assessment of legal risk. Advisors who pushed aggressive structures during the Beckham law era may have satisfied clients in the short term, but they created enormous long-term problems. Professional responsibility includes saying no to clients when requested structures cross lines or create unacceptable risk. For tax authorities, the case demonstrates both the power and limits of aggressive enforcement. Spanish prosecutors successfully extracted hundreds of millions in additional revenue from footballers, sending a powerful message about compliance. However, The cases also contributed to talent flight from La Liga and may have had broader negative effects on Spain's reputation as a place to do business. Enforcement strategies must balance revenue collection with broader economic impacts. For society, Ronaldo's case raises uncomfortable questions about inequality and justice. The settlement that kept him out of prison while imposing manageable fines felt, to many, like an example of two-tier justice where wealth buys better outcomes. Whether this perception is fair, given complexities of the case and common sentencing practices for white-collar crime, is debatable, but the perception exists and undermines confidence in legal systems. The case also illustrates the challenges tax systems face in a globalized economy. When people and their income streams can span multiple jurisdictions simultaneously, traditional concepts of tax residence and source of income become difficult to apply. Ronaldo's image genuinely did have international value that transcended any single country. Determining how much tax Spain deserved versus other countries wasn't a simple question, yet law and tax systems demand precise answers. Looking forward, Ronaldo's tax case will be remembered as a watershed moment in football finance. It marked the end of an era when aggressive offshore tax planning was standard practice and largely unchallenged. It ushered in a new era of greater scrutiny, more conservative structuring, and explicit consideration of tax risk in career decisions. For Ronaldo personally, the case will be a footnote in a remarkable career rather than its defining feature. His 5 Ballons d'Or, multiple Champions League titles, and status as one of the greatest players ever will be his primary legacy. But that footnote serves as a permanent reminder that even the greatest athletes are not above the law, and that financial decisions can have consequences that fame and wealth cannot fully insulate against. The tax case ultimately reveals the complexity of modern celebrity. Where athletes operate as global businesses, tax systems struggle to keep up with that reality, and the line between legitimate tax planning and illegal evasion remains frustratingly blurry. Ronaldo's experience, from aggressive structuring, through investigation and prosecution, to eventual settlement and recovery, will be studied by athletes, advisors, and tax authorities for years to come as a lesson in what to do, what not to do, and how difficult these issues truly are to navigate. In the end, Ronaldo paid his fines, served his symbolic sentence, and moved on with his life and career. The Spanish treasury received its money. Justice, in some form, was served. But the broader questions about fairness, globalization, taxation of the ultra-wealthy, and whether legal systems treat famous footballers differently than ordinary citizens remain unresolved. These questions will continue to generate debate long after the details of Ronaldo's specific case have faded from public memory.